so much for coming back for day 2 and hoping we're going to keep up the really good conversations that we were having from yesterday. I know at least the team up here at the front, we were finding them very fascinating, especially to better understand your approaches to service design and delivery, but also some of the challenges, especially with the budget process that we discussed yesterday as well. So thank you for that. Before we get going today, we want to have some time for you to come back together and reflect on yesterday, but also warm up your brains a little bit as well. So we're going to do the exercise again, where we're going to break into pairs or small groups, and we're going to cover these 2 questions today. So what was the main thing that you've taken away, or you remember from yesterday's session? And then what are you most excited to explore today? The other way to think about that is maybe what are you hoping that we will give you today? And then what we'll do is we'll do a Mentimeter exercise where we'll capture those ideas, and then we'll try and make sure that we hit those points during the presentations today as well. So please, if you'd like to get into your small groups, we'll give you 5 minutes for each question. So if you want to start, get into your pairs or your small groups, and then start with what is the main thing that you took away from yesterday or you remember this morning. Thank you. Yeah. That's expected. I don't know about that. As much as you use the buzzword. There's substance behind it. Okay, thank you. So that's the first 5 minutes up. So if you could move on to question 2 then. We want to know what you're most excited to discuss today, what you're hoping to get from us, and then we'll take those ideas and we'll put it into the Mentimeter tool that we were using yesterday. see people are joining the Mentimeter now, so just a reminder from yesterday, you can scan the QR code with your phone, or you can open it in your browser using menti.com and the code 49245997. Okay, and then if everybody's joined the Mentimeter, then if you can give me your inputs then from your last discussion with your peers. So what is it that you are hoping that we will cover today? What are you excited to hear today? And then we'll try to take these ideas and make sure that we cover them throughout the different presentations and activities we've got. We've got 4 different presentations as part of the morning session, and then this afternoon we've got an interactive session where we can try and dive a bit deeper into the specific challenges you've got. So we can make sure we cover it in each of those areas. Ideas coming through now, so specific examples of how to do user testing and engagement, AI, ideas to improve digital services, personal data protection, integration, service design, use of data and AI, which our tutor will cover at least the data part, and how to drive digital government, digital vision from OECD and DGA. Excellent. I'll give it another 30 seconds if there are any more responses out there that people are still sending through. Excellent. Okay, thank you everyone for those inputs. We'll make sure we cover them, and including the ones that were submitted in time. So now, I think to hand off today, I will invite Martin Lupton from UK Genius for the first session.
Good morning. Okay, hopefully, can you hear me okay? Do I need a different microphone? I'm a little bit too tall for this. Can I have a microphone? All right, can you hear me a little bit better now? Excellent. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you again today. So, my name is Martin Lupton. I am the Head of Product at the Government Digital Service, focusing on our digital service platforms, which I will introduce in a few minutes. I've been at GDS for about 7 years. The first 5 of those were on Gov.uk, and the last 2 years have been on our digital service platforms. You'll likely have heard of GDS. We established the trailblazing government website, Gov.uk. We provided an example of digital transformation to governments across the world, have an internationally influential brand and design system, and our platform products have been adopted by other countries like Canada and Australia. In this session, I'm going to cover 3 areas with you all. First of all, how the Government Digital Service started transforming government. I will then talk about what we did next and what we're doing now. And then in my final section, I'll talk about where we want to go in the future and how we're going to get there. As part of this, I'll be referencing our work on the once-only principle. I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, and we'll have time for questions at the end. But if you have questions as we go, please feel free to put your hand up. I'm quite happy to have questions as we go. Let's start by looking at how GDS started helping government to better design and deliver seamless end-to-end services. In the old, or maybe not so old days, interacting with government involved lots of paper forms and was mostly offline, insecure, slow, and expensive. When combined with the complexity of government, this made for a seriously bad user experience. The UK government consists of hundreds of thousands of civil servants, 24 different departments, and more than 400 agencies. All these different organisations, not so long ago, had their own individual websites. There are nearly 2,000 of them in total. This led to confusion and frustration from users who just wanted to find out important information rather than being sent between hundreds of different websites, all with different layouts. Users shouldn't need to know how government is structured or what departmental responsibilities are to be able to find what they need. And how did people know what to trust with so many different government brands? This caused duplication, contradiction, and a loss of users' trust. There was also no common approach to privacy or accessibility, so there was obviously a need to improve the digital landscape of government in the UK. One person who recognised this and realised that things could be better was Martha Lane Fox. She's a digital entrepreneur who set up lastminute.com. In 2010, the Cabinet Office asked her to do a strategic review of DirectGov, which at that time was the government's main online platform. She actually went beyond this and wrote a wide-ranging report about how government could use the internet to better interact with citizens and deliver more efficient public services online. The Government Digital Service was established soon after the review with this purpose at its heart: to make digital government simple, clear and fast for everyone. GDS was a new government department and was set up at the very centre of the UK government, reporting directly to the Cabinet Office, which is the ministerial department responsible for developing and coordinating government policies. Between January 2011 and October 2012, GDS created the website gov.uk. All government departments were mandated to work with GDS in order to close their websites and move content over to gov.uk. There was a lot of scepticism and resistance in government to do this, and it was really hard. But we did it. And the impact on the user experience was huge. Users found it much easier to find the information they needed, and the redesigned information was much easier for them to understand. And government saved millions of pounds for the taxpayer as it shut down all of these other websites. Crucially, the new website was all under a single government brand. This is about consistency of experience, but also trust. We developed an instantly recognizable logo and design. We relied heavily on established and recognized designs to develop an accessible and trusted identity. Interestingly, this involved us using the same font that we use on road signs in the UK. And we have the simplified crown logo as the logo for our websites. Just a side note, when we had the death of Queen Elizabeth and King Charles coming to the throne, we had to change that logo, and it was really annoying, but that's another thing I can talk about if anyone's interested later. Also, don't quote me on that. As part of our engagement with departments, we also championed user-centered design practices. For government, this was almost unheard of. This meant creating services around the end users and their needs, not government, as obviously we've discussed in some of the best practice examples already. At GDS, we test what we build with a diverse range of real users who reflects the population. This makes us challenge our assumptions and design for what people actually need. This is reflected in our design principles, which begin with user needs. These 10 principles are a framework for all of the work that we do at GDS. They provide guidance on how to keep the user at the heart of design and are a reminder of our role and responsibility as governments. In GDS, and now across governments in the UK, we work in multidisciplinary teams, including design specialists and technologists and loads of different digital roles. We didn't just stop with websites and content, we wanted to improve government's interactive services as well. So in early 2013, GDS gave ourselves 400 days to transform 25 major public services, building digital exemplars so good that people would prefer to use those to the non-digital versions. We picked some big services that were used by lots of citizens and which either weren't digital at all or which had existing digital services that weren't very good. GDS, at the centre of governments, partnered with departments and agencies to work on these services. We work with departmental teams, including frontline civil servants and policy experts. We launched 20 new digital services to the public, including some really important ones, like registering to vote and making a lasting power of attorney. These are just some of my favourites, but there's a list online that you can check out. These exemplar services were successful because they had a few different things. First of all, they had belief and sponsorship from the very top of the organisation and government. They had collaboration with people on the ground who understood the domain and the users and their problems. They also had a combination of skills and talents working on these projects together, and they focused on service design and service redesign as part of their brief. So that's how the Government Digital Service started transforming government. Let's now look at what we did next and where we're going now. We'd shown that radical improvements to services were possible through our work on the exemplars. But all of this work required hands-on involvement of experts from GDS and the building of similar things again and again in different services. We wanted to transform government at a greater scale, so we built a way for service teams across government to build and run services more quickly, cheaply and effectively. This meant that we were now building government services as well as building directly for our citizens. We built a series of digital service platforms They provide a central platform offer that makes it easier for departments and agencies to provide simple, secure, and accessible digital services. As you'll have seen from many other examples worldwide, including here, of this type of product offering, these central platform offers make it easier for departments to provide simple, secure, and accessible digital services. They provide common functionality so that teams don't have to build it from scratch themselves or go to procurement, which can take ages and be really expensive and difficult. So our platforms at GDS allow people to build interfaces, send emails, text messages and letters, collect information and take payments. We make sure that our platforms are fast and easy to start using. That's really important to getting adoption of them. And we make sure that they're well designed, self-service, so they're not too expensive for us to run. And we also make sure that they provide really good value for money to government. Let's do a quick tour of some of these products. We have Gov.uk Notify, which allows services to contact their users. Gov.uk Pay, which allows users to make payments to government. We have the Gov.uk Design System, which helps teams produce services that look and feel like Gov.uk, saving them time, money, and effort building accessible components. And we have Gov.uk Forms, which is a new addition to our set of products. It actually officially moved into public beta just last week. Gov.uk Forms enables central government departments to create accessible online forms without having to have technical knowledge. This product is really important because there are about 10,000 PDF forms on Gov.uk. A large percentage of these PDF forms are actually government services. In these cases, these services require the user to download, fill in, and then send back the PDF form. This is a really bad way to deliver government services. PDF forms are slow, wasteful, inaccessible, and a bad user experience. Our new forms product allows government to create high quality, accessible digital forms so that people won't need to resort to making PDF forms in the future. Taking GDS's platform products as a whole, we support around 10,000 services across central and local government and the public sector. For a budget of about £15 million, these platforms deliver £82 million in savings. And in my opinion, that's an underestimate. We need to get a bit more work with our economists to prove our benefits beyond this. But even that figure, I think, is a very good return on investment for the UK government. So thinking about business cases and some of the budget challenges that we were talking about yesterday, platform products are always a very good investment, and they should be the kind of products that our finance friends are really supportive of, because the return on investment of building once and then using widely is very high. GDS, my organisation, focuses on building and running software. A few years ago, we created a sister organisation to focus on standards, governance, and upskilling government. This is the Central Digital and Data Office. It was created to set strategic direction for all of government's digital and data work, to work on strategic change that only the very centre of government can do. For example, cross-governmental improvements on how much pay digital staff get so that we can attract and retain digital talent. They also set common standards, like our Technology Code of Practice and the Service Standard. They lead on cross-government digital and data governance and assurance, including spend controls, which we can talk about a little bit more later on if that's of interest to people, because I think those are really important. The goal of our spend control process is to make sure that bad services don't get built or funded. The Central Digital and Data Office also oversees cross-departmental forums to hold departments to account. For example, we have the Digital and Data Board, which holds our permanent secretaries, the highest level of seniority of civil servants in a department, to account. They also review overall digital performance and work to improve the capability of the 32,000 members of the digital and data profession in the UK government. Let's go back to GDS and some of the other work that we're doing. The other pillar of our work is making it easier for people to prove who they are online. At the moment, to access hundreds of government services in the UK, users need to navigate up to 190 different accounts using 44 different sign-in methods. And you need to understand how government is organised to be able to find and make sense of them. Departments have historically procured or built and run their own identity checking and login systems. This is obviously a not very good situation. So instead of making users repeatedly provide the same information and manage lots of different accounts, we're building a simple, inclusive process to access multiple government services. One login for all of governments. Our single sign-on and identity checking solution for government will improve the user experience, reduce costs for governments, make identity verification more inclusive, and reduce identity fraud. It allows people to prove their identity on the web, through an app, or in person if they need to. I'm now going to look ahead to how we want to improve the digital experience in the future. The UK had an election earlier this year, and the new administration is currently working out how it wants to structure digital work for the next few years. I want to give you an inside take on some of the discussions and ideas here. So please note that some of what I share with you is work in progress and that things might change. Here are our draft goals for transforming the digital experience over the next 5 years. We want to move away from just having one-off, impersonal transactions with users. And instead, we want to build personalized relationships with users that cut across departmental boundaries. We want to go beyond focusing on helping central government and actually help local government and the wider public sector as well. We want to carry out more systemic reforms to make digital delivery easier. We talked yesterday about some of the challenges of budgeting and planning processes in a Thai context. There are certainly challenges around how our systems work in the UK as well that we haven't fixed yet, so there's lots more work for us to do. And we want to keep joining up government, reducing the number of different units and brands to improve efficiency and effectiveness. We want to make sure that central teams are more coherent and working to the same vision. In this final section of the presentation, I'm going to talk about how we'll get there. To help us achieve these ambitions, we want to do more to help government services transform, and not just the big, well-funded services. To do this, we need to fill in a gap in our platform offering. I'll show you what I mean. Here are some common steps in a service journey. Not all services are quite as linear as this example, but many of them are. You've seen how GDS currently supports the different parts of this service. But there's a gap. We currently provide nothing to help service teams process forms and manage cases. So right now, teams need to either build their own back office system, buy and integrate a commercial platform, or rely on some improvised process involving emails and spreadsheets. This can lead to some bad outcomes. We want to address this gap and join up our platform offering into an even more coherent whole, so that teams across government can quickly and at low cost create high quality end-to-end services without having to integrate between the different components that we offer themselves. Why is this important? Here's a service map of an example service. The section in purple, the top left. Okay, I can't highlight it. Yeah, the section in purple at the top left shows the parts of the service that are delivered by our existing public-facing products, so the fantastic ones that I showed you a few minutes ago. Everything else is behind-the-scenes government processes. This is why we won't transform government services if we only focus on the parts that are exposed to citizens. Issues in all of these other parts of the service map will still be experienced by citizens. As delays, errors, or poor outcomes. Caseworkers are often overlooked in favour of citizens, so their tools are often inefficient. We have an opportunity to do better service design of the caseworker experience, as well as the user-facing experience. We've done a lot in the last 10 years to improve service touchpoints for users in the UK. But until we do the same for the people running those services, citizens will still experience delays, errors, and poor outcomes. Our vision of a more personalised experience of government requires a strong foundation of identity assurance. So in addition to this work to improve the experience of civil servants delivering services, we will continue rolling out our digital identity products to citizens. So far, I think we have 52 services on board with our digital identity products. That's up from, I think, 49 2 weeks ago. So that gives you an idea of the pace there. And the big milestone that we're looking forward to is getting our tax department on board, because they have a different account and login system. So when we get them moved over, that will be a very big landmark for us. So we're quite excited about it. We're working on a digital wallet to help us deliver increasingly personalised and proactive government services. This will sit within a government-produced app that we're also working on. It will provide one login users with a convenient and secure way to store, access, and share their government-issued verified credentials. We want to make it so that people only have to tell government once about key life events, such as a change of address, and have that information shared with all of the relevant services. This idea is still in its early stages, really. It builds on the Tell Us Once service, which we built a number of years ago in our Department of Work and Pensions, which is Social Security and Benefits. That Tell Us Once service allows users to tell government about someone dying, and then it shares this information across central and local government. The idea was that you should only tell government once if someone has died. In that situation, you have enough sadness and difficulty without the government making your life even harder and sadder, right? We'll also change how digital government is structured in the UK. This is currently being discussed at the highest levels of seniority, so it's sensitive and subject to change, so please don't talk publicly about anything that I say for the next few minutes. But I do want to share as much as I can with you. This stuff is going to be announced for real on the 9th of December, so we will see what exactly happens, but some things that I expect to change based on what I've heard are as follows. First of all, I think that the splitting out of the Government Digital Service and the Central Digital and Data Office, I think that will probably be reversed. At the moment, we're looking at combining the Government Digital Service, the Central Digital and Data Office, and then also the government's incubator for artificial intelligence into a single organisation. So that's something I'm expecting to see happen. In other words, that will mean central digital products, cross-government digital policy, standards, governance and capability, and the exploration of new AI ideas will probably all come into a single organisation. I'm also expecting to see closer links between Cabinet Office, the Treasury, and this new digital centre, so that we have a stronger link between central policy oversight of government, but then also the digital oversight of government and control of who gets money to spend on things and who doesn't. We've already seen that in practice with the new government. There's been a tighter link between those three parts of government. So I think that's going to continue. And the last change I expect to see is a change in who reports to who across governments. So this might sound a bit boring, but I think actually this might be the most important change. So what I'm anticipating seeing is a change in the reporting structure for our chief digital officers in departments, and I think that they will quite likely end up reporting to a single permanent secretary level chief digital officer. That's just my prediction, that's just my guess. Please don't share that outside of this room in case I'm wrong or it causes diplomatic problems. But that's my expectation, and the reason for that change is, at the moment, individual departments can do their own thing, and you don't have a central control to make sure that people are joining up, are collaborating in the right way, and so on. And that's because ultimately the most senior person working on digital in each department still reports into that department's permanent secretary, so they will ultimately have to follow what that person says. Whereas if they are now reporting in to someone who is looking at the whole system across all of governments, then their goals and incentives look quite different. So personally, I'm really excited about that change. So fingers crossed that's something that does get announced. As you can see, in the UK we've covered a lot of ground since 2010, and we have a good view of the journey ahead. I hope that you now have a good understanding of how GDS started transforming governments, the progress that we've made since 2010, and also an understanding of the work ahead of us to continue making things better for our users. So let's wrap up what we've seen here. Reviewing what we've seen, I wanted to give you some key takeaways for other countries from the UK's experience since 2010. A lot of these will be things that you're already doing, but that's good. I think you should celebrate the things you're already doing, as well as the things that you want to strengthen or start doing. One thing that's been foundational for the UK transforming digital government has been establishing a shared understanding of the problem that needs solving. So think back to Martha Lane Fox and the report that she wrote about how rubbish the experience was in the UK. That was the foundation for all of the transformation that has followed on. Crucially, her report is really short. I think it's maybe 2.5 pages long. It's really good. It was concise and easy to understand. It was the kind of thing that everyone could read and feel excited about and motivated by. I think that was essential for everything that has come next. Related to this, making sure that you have the political will to push for big changes, like shutting down thousands of websites, is really important, because big changes can be controversial. They can challenge the existing ways that things are done. That can be uncomfortable, it can generate new work for people, it can make life more challenging for them. So it's really important to make sure that there is that political will to make those changes. Bring government's websites together into a single brand and experience. Hopefully you've seen in the UK's example, this has been so important for our successors. Do the hard work to allow people from different parts of government to come together to work on a shared whole with really high quality standards. I haven't talked much about ways of working. We can definitely cover this more in questions and answers later on. Agile product management approaches, as opposed to project management approaches, and multidisciplinary teams of specialists all working together have been essential to the UK's success in digital government. We find that agile approaches work better when faced with uncertainty and change than waterfall project management approaches. Certainly, in my work, there's lots of uncertainty and change. I imagine that you will face lots of uncertainty and change in your work, so I imagine that you will have similar benefits from agile working. As part of that, embrace not knowing things and learning and adapting as you go. This can be a really big cultural challenge and a really big cultural change. Make some big, visible improvements to services to build your credibility and momentum. You saw how the Exemplars program in the UK helped us achieve this. So we didn't try and reform and fix all of government at once, but we identified some targeted areas where we could really show how we could make things better. Scale your transformation across services by building a running platform centrally for service teams to adopt. Make sure that everyone in government knows what good digital services look like, and make sure that you have the mechanisms in place to make sure that people work to these standards in practice. It's one thing to have a poster on the wall saying we hold to these principles. It's another thing to say, to make that real in terms of what gets funded, what doesn't, And when people get told, no, your service isn't good enough, you need to do some more work before we can share that with the public. This type of work probably involves spend control and assurances of services over time. Think about how you can transform the experience and productivity of people working on government services and experience extra productivity gains. This is an area, as you've seen, we've not started working on yet, so I definitely don't stand here and pretend that we've fixed this part of things, not at all. But certainly I wanted to share my insights that there are lots of opportunities in this space as well. We've now looked at the history, the present, and the future of digital government in the UK, and I've shared my thoughts on what might be useful to take away from the UK's experience. I hope this has been useful. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, yes.
If nobody has a question to start, I might start with one of my own. So I think you touched on it a little bit at the end there, but as part of talking about the service exemplars, you spoke about the importance of capability in service design, but also service redesign,
Yes.
which I thought was interesting. And I think maybe for our colleagues here in the Thai context, that maybe I think resonates a little bit more. So you able to talk us through basically the approach you take to redesigning a service and where it might be different to service design?
Yeah. Thank you. So I think the first thing to say is that service design, doing service design or redesign as part of transformation is the ideal standard that we want to meet. It's not always what happens. Often you'll just have, as we saw yesterday in some of the presentations, you will often have an existing service simply moved online, but everything really is the same behind the scenes. You just have a slightly nicer interface, right? So that often happens because it's quicker and cheaper, or seen as quicker and cheaper and easier to do things that way. But in the cases where we have been able to secure a little bit of funding, to think about things a bit more deeply, and sometimes take a little bit more time to explore the underlying goals and intent of the service, then actually there are some really good opportunities to make things more efficient and effective. So specifically, we will often work with service designers. That's one of our key roles in our teams. And their responsibility is very much for understanding the whole of an existing service, for mapping it out, kind of similar to how a business analyst might do. But they are thinking more from a user experience design perspective. So we find that working with service designers is really, really valuable. And then you can map out a service like we've done. Oh, I've broken it. Okay. You remember the example with the little purple box, right? So actually mapping out and getting a shared understanding of a service, identifying the redundant steps, testing that existing service with users and finding out where the problems are at the moment, taking the time to explore the costs of different parts of the service, finding out what parts are easy and hard for internal users and members of the public. This can give a really good foundation for understanding. Excellent, thank you. It can give you a really good foundation for understanding what opportunities there are for redesigning the service as a whole. So rather than just kind of making it a bit more digital, actually saying, we can cut out this step. You know, maybe this part of the process could be simpler. Maybe this bit that involves a human being doing something could actually be handled in a different way. Maybe we don't need to ask this question. Maybe people don't need to wait a week to hear back for this thing. Maybe we can do something different. So all of those different mechanisms can help you get visibility of what actually is this service that we're trying to make digital or to improve. And then from there, if you have analytics on what's working at the moment, or if you have maybe management information on your costs or how much you're spending in your call center. That can help you start to build a picture of which parts of the service might be particularly in need of some improvement. And that can be a really useful way to say, okay, rather than just taking what we have and shifting it online, let's go and redesign some of this. And in some cases, this is going to look more like evolution. And in some cases, it will be more like revolution, doing something new. And that will depend a little bit on the context. It will depend a little bit on how much money you think you can argue for, or how much time you think you can argue for. And sometimes it will depend on how big and scary the problem is. Sometimes the problem is really big and tricky, but actually if you only make a small part of it better, you can still have a very big impact. So yeah, that's a build on that. I can share some resources as well after this, talking about service design a little bit more, but also talking about some of the approaches to user research that we use, and also some of the new approaches to user research that involve continually interviewing with your users so that you gain a better understanding, not just of what's working right now with your service, but so you get a wider understanding of needs and opportunities so that you can make improvements in an ongoing way.
Another one of the items that was coming through quite strongly in the reflection this morning was around AI, which is obviously a thing that everyone's looking at a lot more. Is that something that you're looking at integrating into the products at the moment? And how, maybe?
Yeah, so the quick answer is yes. The more detailed answer is the implementation that in practice at GDS has kind of largely been defined by organisational silos, and I don't think, to be honest, that we've done quite as good a job as we could have done. What do I mean? So specifically, a lot of the artificial intelligence work at the moment that we're doing is around exploring the idea of a chatbot for interacting with the UK government. So we have very recently launched an experimental chatbot. It uses ChatGPT with various safeguards on top, and it's focused on business users. So the goal is to help business users more easily understand the content that's on Gov.uk. I think it's a really interesting experiment. I think it's awesome that we're doing it. At the moment, my part of the organisation doesn't have easy access to those capabilities and skills. So I have many, many exciting ideas for how I would like to use artificial intelligence and machine learning. But at the moment, I personally don't have straightforward access to human beings to work on that stuff, which is sometimes a challenge, right? So my hope is that in some of the structural changes that are coming up, there might be an opportunity to harness maybe some capabilities I don't have access to at the moment. Because you think about stuff like this, you think about caseworking, there are loads of opportunities to make life easier for caseworkers using artificial intelligence. So, as an organisation, we are doing some stuff on this, experimenting early, thinking about trust, thinking about ethics, thinking about privacy and safeguarding has been essential to our approach as an organisation. So those are some things that I can say have been working really well. But I think, speaking personally, and off the record, I could get in trouble for saying this, I think that there's more, as an organisation as a whole, that we could probably do.
I'm interested, are you able to maybe expand a little bit more on the safeguards and what you consider that?
Yeah, so I think I might talk about this a little bit in one of our other presentations, but we do quite a lot of red teaming. So we will get people outside of an individual team to be testing in a kind of an aggressive way, trying to break something. This is particularly important with large language models because you can get them to say weird things. One early example was getting the chatbot to talk in French instead of English. That was the thing that we discovered you could do, so we had to fix that. But there can obviously be more serious examples, right, of how things could go wrong or give misleading information. So that's one side of it, testing it out. a more aggressive way. We've also done lots of work with our partners across governments in terms of the security agencies who are more expert on cybersecurity than part of the organisation that built the chatbot. So there's lots of collaboration with security experts on this, and also assurance with people outside of government. So getting outside people to give us input and expertise and advice has been really helpful. And also the way that we've gone about building this product and launching it has been to start small, to test and iterate. So we started off testing with, I think, maybe just a handful of users, right? We invited them into our offices and we tested with them in person. That's a very low-risk way of testing an idea. Then from there, we've moved into a private beta so that a smaller number of, well, like a slightly larger number of users can access things, but again, it's quite controlled. We have very clear messaging around expectations so that people don't get the wrong idea of what it can and can't do. And so again, recently, as we've been expanding this a little bit more, we've been doing it in a way to make very clear this is an early technology, this is an experiment, and we haven't just launched it to all of our users at once. So again, we've been able to assess what's been working, what's not been working. We've built in user feedback, so we've been getting feedback and insight from users that are using the system, both in terms of quantitative metrics, but also qualitative feedback that people have shared. So we've baked in lots of insight gathering as well. So I think in summary, some of this is around the work you do up front, around designing with experts, around collaborating, around testing things in a kind of adversarial way. But then some of this is around how you slowly introduce it to the public, how you test things, how you adapt based on what you learn.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question at the back, please.
ค่ะขอเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะค่ะ UK มีวิธีทำยังไงให้สามารถให้ทุกหน่วยงานสามารถรวมบริการไว้ในที่เดียวได้เช่นปิดเว็บไซต์ไปเลยไหมหรือว่าไม่ให้เงินในการพัฒนาบริการนะคะแล้วก็รวมมีวิธีการแบ็กออฟฟิศยังไงระหว่างหน่วยงานด้วยค่ะอันนี้คือคำถามแรกนะคะคำถามที่สองค่ะ Digital Service Standard เนี่ยเป็นเรื่องที่จำเป็นมากน้อยแค่ไหนคะถ้าในกรณีที่ประเทศไทยยังไม่ได้มีการทำ Digital Service Standard เนี่ยประเทศไทยควรจะเริ่มอย่างไรคะแล้วก็คำถามสุดท้ายนะคะก็คือขอให้ยกตัวอย่างการนำเอา Data หรือว่า Feedback จากประชาชนหรือว่า User ค่ะมาใช้ในการพัฒนาบริการของ UK ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to write those down for a second. Okay, so the questions are really good. So the first question was around shutting down websites and how we did it. This was a process that took a couple of years, and it was very much a case of saying to different departments, we are shutting down your websites. So it wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't a question, it was very much, we are shutting down all of these websites and we're going to have one website for all of governments. So the way that worked was GDS set up GDS at the central government had a team specifically working on this transition from existing departmental websites on to Government UK. And so these transition teams would work with different departments to help them identify their existing content, their existing user journeys, do some redesign as well. So there was lots of redesign of government content, making it easier to understand, getting rid of loads of information that wasn't important and was just confusing, condensing things down, making it simple to read and understand. So there's lots of that work going on. And there was also at the same time negotiation to encourage departments on to Government UK. But to be very clear, this was something that was mandated centrally. So there was the political force behind this movement. So there were clear deadlines for it, and all departments had to get onto gov.uk. Now sometimes there were a couple of things that were a bit weird, sometimes there was a little negotiation that led to something a little bit strange happening, but that was very much the exception rather than the rule. And so it has become, and it remains the case, that the website www.gov.uk is the place to go for information and services in the UK. I'll talk a little bit more in the later presentation about how we protect gov.uk and also how we make a more coherent experience of what's going on. So I'll move on to the next question, but hopefully I'll cover more of that later on. So the second bit was about the service standard and how important it is. I think the service standard is really, really important. I mean, we saw yesterday in how this kind of approach is used in Australia, and also how actually a lot of that thinking has been improved and enhanced in an Australian context. It's really important to have a service standard, in my opinion, because if you don't explain, if you don't have an idea yourself of what a good service looks like, then it's very hard to build one. And if you don't have a good understanding yourself of what a good service looks like, it's even harder to have a conversation with someone else to say, you need to make your service better, it's not good enough. So in my experience, the service standard is tremendously important. The design principles are tremendously important. On my laptop, I have a load of bookmarks that I access a lot, and the design principles and the service standard are right at the top, because I'm always using them in conversation, I'm always thinking about them, and also when I'm talking to other people, I'm always referring back to them. So they've given us a common language for agreeing what a good service looks like and being able to talk about that with each other. And so I think it's really foundational, and I would certainly encourage the adoption of that kind of practice here. Examples of changing things based on user feedback. So there's a load of different ways that we get user feedback. So some of this is people telling us what they like and what they don't like, but actually that's not the most important. Really, the feedback that I find most important and valuable is feedback on problems that people have, challenges that they have, what went wrong, what broke for them. So we collect this as standard on all of our services. As we heard yesterday, collecting this information at the end of a service is useful, but also collecting it during a service is even better, because that way if someone gets so upset or has such a bad experience that they leave halfway through, you can get some insight from them. But you also want to combine this with other sources of insight from users, right? So quantitative performance data probably, so that you can see, it looks like 90% of users are exiting this service halfway through. What's up with that? Maybe we should find out. And so we find a really nice interplay between that quantitative insight generation and then more detailed user research. So for example, let's say in that service we find out that 90% of users are dropping off at particular points. We might not know why. Maybe some users have left some feedback to give us some hints, but fundamentally what we need to do is to zoom in more closely to try and understand that. And that would be where we would do some user research. So we would get some users, we would invite them to share their screen with us or come into the office in person, and we'd say, look, go through this service, try and use it, and we'll see if you manage to do it, or if it breaks, or if you have a problem. And we encourage them to think aloud as they go, so we can tell what they're thinking. And then we will be able to identify, oh, okay, we think this is probably what's going wrong here. It helps us understand more what's happening. So that's a general explanation. To give specific examples, honestly, this is stuff we can see across all of our different services. One service I worked on during COVID was around procurement of personal protective equipment, but also any other help, frankly, that the UK government could get from the private sector. And one early piece of feedback that we got from that, which was basically was that some of the journey was a little bit too complicated and confusing. This was maybe because we built it over a weekend as an emergency. But we got that feedback early on. That was really useful. And so then that allowed us to say, okay, we need to go and make this a little bit more simple. We need to put a little bit more effort into making it clearer, reducing the complexity. And then that helps. And then we could see the impact of that in the statistics about how many people were able to get through the service smoothly and easily. So you see that interplay between understanding users' experience at scale, using quantitative data, and then zooming in with user research or feedback to get a closer understanding of why is this actually happening. Okay, I think that's my 3 questions. How are we doing for time?
I think we're a little bit over, but if there are any, the next session Martin will be in as well, so if there are any other questions we can always come back as well. But I don't see any hands up. So what I'll do now is I'll invite Bronwyn Walker from Australia's Digital Transformation Agency. Sorry, there is one at the back, please.
One more question. ถ้าไทยปิดเว็บไซต์บริการ
Sorry. Thank you.
ถ้าไทยปิดเว็บไซต์บริการของหน่วยงานยังไม่ได้มีข้อเสนอแนะอะไรบ้างเช่นทำ one stop service portal ที่รวมบริการหน่วยงานรัฐไว้ที่เดียวขณะเดียวกันก็ยังให้หน่วยงานมีเว็บไซต์ของตัวเองควบคู่กันไปได้หรือไม่ค่ะ
Thank you. Good question. I think it's certainly possible, and I think that sometimes, even if you want to have a big revolution, like a really big dramatic change, sometimes if it's not possible, I think you have to be pragmatic and think, okay, what are we able to do? What's within our power? What changes can we make? And I think that in the Thai context, if we say, like, look, it's lovely, Martin, that you've shown how you shut down all those government websites. We can't do that right now. This is not helpful for us. If that's the case, I think then asking the question, okay, what can we do to move towards a more integrated, coherent experience is a smart question. And I think that an experience for users that feels more consistent, that makes it easier for them to understand where to go and how things interrelate is a good thing to do, right? And so I think the idea of creating a easy to understand entry point into things sounds like a good improvement. And so even if when people go into those services, go into those websites, they're a bit more inconsistent and it's not perfect, I think just doing that work to help people at the start of their journey orient themselves, understand what's there, understand where to go, can be really valuable, because actually that ability to map out government and make sense of what it is and what the different parts are and where you want to go for a particular problem, that can be so incredibly valuable that actually I would say that could be something really powerful and transformative for you to work on.
Thank you.
To the last question, just to give you an example. So in Korea, there's a what's called Gov.kr, where citizens can go to access government services. But still, each ministry and agency, they have their own website. It's just that every governmental website, they have the same design and so same look and feel. So the citizens, when they're accessing this individual website, they already know that they're accessing a governmental website. And although these websites, they don't provide any services, as services are integrated into Gov.kr. So from citizens' point of view, they just need to know about Gov.kr for their services. But let's say I want to know what happened to the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Interior and Safety, I will go onto gov.kr. I will just do a Google search, and then it will lead me to the ministry's websites where more details are provided on their activities of each agency.
One last point before I hand over the microphone. There is a little bit more complexity to how the UK government website is architected, which I'll talk about, I think, in my next presentation. So we'll talk about like the information part of gov.uk, the services part of it, who runs what. We can get into it in more detail, but I've already talked for too long, so I'll pass the microphone over.
Excellent. So we are now moving into the session on moving from fragmentation to integration. So we have two presentations. So we'll have one from our Australian colleague, Markham, and then Martin will come back and do his presentation, and then we'll break for questions again at the end. So if you have any questions, make sure you're writing them down, and we'll cover them at the end of the two presentations. So please, Ron, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So just checking before I start, can everyone in the back hear me? Thumbs up? Excellent, thank you. It was actually a great question at the end there about agencies still having their own websites, but having a portal to get in there, because that is actually a great segue into my presentation from fragmentation to integration, because today I'm going to be talking mostly about our digital access standard, which is focusing on our MyGov portal, which is about bringing agencies together under the one sort of cohesive approach for users. So, Digital Transformation Agency recognises the need for government to provide omni-channel services to ensure that citizens can access government services seamlessly through their preferred channels. In fact, the Digital Service Standard points out that agencies should design omni-channel pathways that cater to non-digital access and experiences that some users rely on to access government services. What I want to do in this session today is to take a deeper look at the fragmentation of services, applications and portals, along with the duplication of websites across Australia's government digital landscape, and how the DTA's work seeks to address these issues for users. Over the last decade, the Australian government's digital services have significantly expanded. Digital services are currently dispersed across multiple agency websites, portals and apps, with over 600 different government access points. This means, as Martin mentioned, that people need to understand how government works to find the support and services they need, leading them to navigate a fragmented and decentralised digital government landscape. The user experience varies significantly across agency access points, and leading to inconsistency and confusion for users. Through standardisation, interoperability and user-centric design, the Australian government architecture and the digital experience policy seek to improve coherence and consistency in the delivery of government digital services. In April 2022, the Australian Government announced an independent user audit of MyGov, aiming to transform it into a world-class, citizen-centric service. The audit, completed in January 2023, produced 10 recommendations for enhancing MyGov's potential. So just a reminder from yesterday, MyGov is an Australian Government online service portal that provides citizens with secure access to various government services and information in one place. The Digital Transformation Agency, or DTA, collaborated with the government to respond to the MyGov user audit, outlining steps to improve MyGov based on the audit's recommendation. The Digital Access Standard was created directly from Recommendation 1 of the MyGov user audit. It was confirmed that MyGov should be the go-to place for people to access services online from the Australian government and also the way to communicate to Australians. The Digital Access Standard promotes reuse across government to minimise the complexity of accessing services through multiple front doors. It sets the criteria for agencies to follow that promotes agencies to consider leveraging existing access points when developing a new digital service so that new solutions are only built if there is a genuine gap or need. The Access Standard is the first of its kind. Nothing like it exists, let alone mandated under a policy. I do want to point out that it's important to recognise that the Access Standard isn't mandating one login for users or a single front door for digital services, but what it's asking agencies to do is to carefully consider whether a new access point is needed or to investigate the benefits of consolidating multiple access points. And again, just a reminder that the Access Standard is not about accessibility or inclusivity. It's about the actual entry points at which a user can access government information or services online and how we can provide a more cohesive experience for them. So when I'm talking about access points related to the Access Standard, what I'm referring to are informational websites, web applications accessed from a web browser, online portals like MyGov, mobile apps and digital wallets. The Access Standard has 5 criteria which encourage agencies to provide a more coherent and integrated experience for users. Criterion 1, understand how your users access services. So this is about making the most of existing access points by understanding where users are already going to access digital government services. Criteria 2, define your service offering. This is about understanding what capabilities are needed to support your new service. Defining the scope, purpose, features and functions of your service offering, aligning it with government priorities and comparing it with existing services to identify gaps, overlaps or opportunities for collaboration is crucial. Criterion 3, use the Australian government architecture to find reusable platforms and capabilities. Agencies should use the Australian government architecture to identify existing capabilities for reuse, ensuring that solutions meet user needs and comparing the benefits of reusing existing platforms versus developing new ones. They should also engage with platform owners to discuss availability, suitability, costs and the onboarding process for their solutions. Criterion 4, follow the decision-making framework. Use the relevant decision-making framework to apply a consistent approach to evaluate if a new access point is actually required. And criterion 5, engage with delivery partners. Engage with delivery partners to establish a successful, collaborative and trusted partnership. So we expect that there has to be compliance with this access standard. So agencies must report compliance with the Digital Experience Policy and its standards using established methods within the DTA's Digital and ICT Investment Oversight Framework with support from the DTA. The DTA will measure success by collecting data on agency compliance through existing mechanisms, contributing to a digital register aimed at tracking and refining the digital landscape of government services. Expected outcomes include consolidation of digital services, a coordinated and centralised digital landscape, and a reduction of access points across the government's digital ecosystem. I just want to finish today talking about best practices in securing coherence when delivering public services by mentioning the Australian Government Architecture. The Australian Government Architecture, or AGA, is a strategic framework designed to facilitate the coherent delivery of public services, ensuring that citizens experience a consistent and seamless interaction regardless of the access point they use. This architecture plays a crucial role in aligning various government departments and agencies, fostering interoperability and promoting uniformity in service delivery. The AGA seeks to achieve coherence and consistency through establishing common standards for developing public services, ensuring compatibility and a consistent user experience across various government entities, facilitating seamless communication and cooperation among different systems and platforms used by government agencies, prioritising user-centric design principles to create services that are easy to use, accessible and intuitive, enhancing the overall experience for citizens, and promoting collaboration among government agencies, and is agreed upon by a centralised governance body to ensure compliance with standards and coordination across entities. So in conclusion, the digital experience policy and the Australian government architecture both seek to improve public services through robust mechanisms that ensure coherence across government digital services. By establishing clear guidelines and standards, we can create a unified approach that minimises fragmentation and maximises efficiency. Policies and frameworks such as these not only enhance the user experience, but also encourages the integration of digital services, making interactions simple, secure and connected.
Thank you so much, Rowan. What we might do now is go straight into Martin's, and then we can go to questions after that. So Martin, please.
Hello, I am still Martin Lugton. I won't introduce myself again. Okay, in this session I'm going to talk about making public services more coherent and integrated. I'm going to talk for about 10-15 minutes. I'll start by talking about measures to secure coherence in delivering public services and promote a consistent user experience. I'll then focus on the challenge of delivering services to different channels. And I will finish by giving an example of the GDS One Login service and how it approaches different channels. Let's start by talking about making a more coherent and consistent user experience. As you have seen, GDS offers a range of products to help departments build and run coherent and consistent services. The Gov.uk brand is consistent across all of our services, and it signals quality and trust. Gov.uk has a higher recognition than many big digital brands like YouTube and Google. Having this brand recognition underpins all the government's digital work in the UK. Through the Gov.uk design system, teams can use existing components to build services that look and feel like Gov.uk. We make it easy to do this by providing a library of code called Gov.uk Frontend. It's just on GitHub and people can freely use it to build their services. More widely, our digital service platforms make it easier for departments and agencies to provide simple, secure and accessible digital services. These also help to drive a consistent, branded, trusted experience for users. For example, every time a user fills in a form or receives a notification from these services, they look the same and they look like government. Our central governance of departmental services helps ensure consistency and coherence. The government design principles set common expectations for how we approach design. So a few minutes ago, I talked about how great the service standard is and how I always have it on my computer ready to access. The other thing I have next to that is the government design principles. These set common expectations for how we approach design, and again, they're the kind of thing that we can refer to in everyday conversation, both inside GDS and then anytime we're collaborating with other people in government, because these set common expectations that we all work towards. Here's the service standards. It defines formal expectations against which all government services are assessed. And we also have a technology code of practice that goes into more technical detail on stuff like cloud hosting. A few minutes ago, we had a couple of questions about gov.uk, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about gov.uk, how it works, and again, we can get into more detail if that's useful. There are more than 700,000 pages of content on gov.uk. We work hard to make sure that gov.uk meets user needs. How does it work? Content on gov.uk is published in a federated way. GDS, my organisation, builds and run the tools for publishing content. So we run the website and its infrastructure. We also manage the most viewed content on gov.uk. Whilst this content only makes up about 1% of those 700,000 pages, these pages, the 1%, receive more than 70% of all traffic to gov.uk. This includes really important information to help people claim benefits, get a passport, or submit a tax return. A large team of content designers in GDS work with departments to continually update and improve this content for users. All the remaining content, the other 99%, the other 699,000 pages, those are managed by the departments. So whilst gov.uk looks like a single thing for the user experience is actually owned in partnership with departments across governments. Our consistent brand and standards make this feel like a seamless experience for users. Hopefully that gives a little bit more detail to follow on from my question response a few minutes ago. We also have a campaigns subdomain, which is for public-facing communications campaigns. We developed a template which allows departments to quickly build public-facing communication campaigns without having to pay an external agency. Gov.uk as a website is underpinned by a clear set of policies, standards and guidance to ensure that the overall experience of gov.uk is consistent, whether you're looking at the content that's created by GDS or whether you're looking at content that's created by one of the many different government departments. User-facing services that citizens in the UK interact with are developed by government departments rather than by GDS. They don't go on the gov.uk website until the team that built them can demonstrate that they've actually met the service standard. So thinking back to a few minutes ago when I said the service standard is good for setting expectations around agreeing what good is, the service standard is also really good for making sure that only good services get shared with the public. This ensures that services will be safe, accessible, consistent and easy to use. And we also make sure that departments get approval for digital spend before they begin building a service. I've talked about making services more coherent and promoting a more consistent user experience. Let's now look at the challenge of delivering services through different channels. People have different devices that they use to access the internet and might be using old browsers. They might have different internet speeds and varying access needs. And people's financial situation might mean that access to the internet is a luxury that they have to use sparingly. We have a responsibility to make interacting with government quick and easy for everyone, regardless of their circumstances. We build for different types of digital device by default through responsive design, and we keep our code lean and minimal to reduce data use. We know that about 6% of people in the UK are digitally excluded, so this is a significant portion of our population. We've also found that younger audiences don't feel as able to access gov.uk and government services in general. So we're looking at, this is part of the motivation for adding an app as an additional channel, and we're also looking at how we can adapt the gov.uk brand to be more welcoming to those users, whilst retaining the trust and credibility that we've established. We're also testing using different communication channels like YouTube and Instagram to reach some of those underserved audiences more on their own terms, rather than just waiting for them to come to gov.uk. Our work is largely focused on channel shift, on building digital services that are so good that people choose to use them. This allows us to save money by delivering through cheaper digital channels, whilst offering an improved experience at the same time. But we know that for some users, non-digital channels remain necessary. Our services have to work for everyone, so we build for non-digital channels too. There's more detail I have on types of exclusion, but I'll go back to that if you have questions on it later. I don't want to talk too long. The UK hasn't always done a great job of multi-channel inclusion. Not having a good non-digital offering is actually the most common cause for services failing in service assessment. Some reasons for this. We often talk about being digital by default and focus simply on moving people online, cutting call centre numbers and reducing costs. This can lead to us forgetting to think about being inclusive. We also often exclude people in operational roles from conversations about service design and transformation. In many departments, operational teams and digital people sit in different teams and have different budgets. So we've changed our approach to try and improve this in the UK. We updated the service standard to be clearer about expectations here for omni-channel delivery. We now talk about whole services and being joined up across multiple channels, rather than thinking about the non-digital offering as if it's a separate add-on that has nothing to do with the rest of the service. And we remind ourselves that whilst these non-digital channels do have a cost, this will be more than offset by the channel shift of the majority of our users. So we're still saving money overall. A couple of tips for doing omni-channel delivery well. First of all, make sure you understand the user needs of all of your users, including those that don't have digital skills, and those who have access needs. If you start with this as a foundation, you'll likely do a good job. And you want to make sure to iterate and test your non-digital offering just as much as the digital parts of your offering. In this final section, I'm going to give an example of the GDS1 login service and how it approaches different channels. Our One Login service makes identity verification more inclusive by broadening the range of documents and evidence that people can use to prove who they are. This means that people who don't have a passport or a driving license can be brought in to digital channels. We're also partnering with the Post Office to provide non-digital options for people that need them. The service is backed by a contact centre with a phone line, email and chat, and help for people with different languages. We deliver our face-to-face identity verification journey through the Post Office. It's an established organisation with a physical presence across the country. Face-to-face is relatively expensive to deliver, so we encourage people to use digital channels wherever possible. Let's wrap up what we've seen here. What have we learned about improving coherence and integration? I think the first key point is that work on common platforms, components, brands, standards and assurance lays the foundations for coherence and integration. And the second key point is that you need to do the work to understand your users and their needs. This allows you to meet their specific needs, including through non-digital routes, whilst providing great, cost-effective and high-quality digital experiences. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Martin. So now we'll go into the Q&A section of the session. So I'll start with one question to Bronwyn to start. So over the last 2 days, you've spoken to us about the digital experience policy, the Australian government architecture, and the access standards as well. Can you talk us through the process of developing policies like these to address these challenges, and what advice you might give to people in the room who are considering the same?
So, it takes a lot of top-down buy-in, I won't deny. We were really fortunate that we had these independent reviews initially and the MyGov user audit, which sparked the interest from the Australian government initially to develop standards that for a whole of government approach. But then what did that look like? So we got these great ideas. We thought we need some sort of performance standard, we need a standard about inclusion, we need to put words on paper. What it actually meant was initially looking for best practice across both internal processes from state and territory jurisdictions, but also from across the globe, looking at what's already in place, what can we leverage, what's working, what can we improve on, like the digital service standard from the UK. And then once we had an idea of what words we wanted to have effectively, we needed to do user research. And I know that we've talked about that a lot, but that meant for us, for example, with the digital inclusion standard, we identified particularly vulnerable cohorts such as First Nation Australians, people with low literacy, but also people with low digital literacy, and then actually going and meeting with those people on the ground to understand what their experience was and what their experience is and what they need from government. So there's lots of information out there that you can Google, but actually getting that first-hand experience about what are they concerned about, data and privacy, when they don't even really understand how to access the service to begin with. So building the criteria out to actually have a robust, inclusive approach. So for example, with the digital performance standard, I think I touched on this a little bit yesterday, but we did the service monitoring pilot, which engaged a couple of several key agencies across the Australian public service. And we looked at what are they actually doing already? What are they monitoring? What are they doing with that data? So a lot of agencies are monitoring and they are collecting data, but they're not using it to build out effective continuous improvement in meaningful ways. They're not making data-driven decisions. They're just reporting on the figures and then moving along, which sounds really bad. And I apologise if there's any agency listening. It's not you. And so it took a lot. So I think I said yesterday, it took 12 months of iterating. So we initially, with the performance standard, for example, which was one that I was heavily involved in, we built that out. We had some great ideas. We put that to agencies, and overwhelmingly, agencies went, "We can't do that. Our systems are old. We can't apply these monitoring tools. How are we going to do this, and how are you going to expect us to do this? We're not going to meet setting us up to fail." And so we actually, you mentioned yesterday, we changed our approach to have outcomes. It's outcomes focused. So focus on the user experience. Do the best that you can, effectively. As long as your agency is putting the processes in place to manage and develop services with a user focus, that's what we're aiming for. I've gone off on a tangent.
It was a good tangent.
Yeah, but that's effectively developing the policy. We had to go through, lots of iterations, really getting that top-down buy-in, but then also the stakeholder engagement of developing it out with the agencies who it's going to be impacted. So they're the ones that have to comply. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to comply.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I believe we have a question up the back. So you've got a microphone already. Perfect. Please.
I have two questions. The first question is, did your country have difficulty developing service standards, and do you have suggestions for Thailand? The second question is, could you explain in detail how do you serve people who are digitally excluded? Thank you.
So maybe, Roland, if we start with you you touched on some of the difficulties with the service standard, but maybe if you can go in a bit more detail.
So the first service standard, the first iteration of the service standard was published in 2016. And it had 13 criteria. And what we found over time was it was just too hard for agencies to successfully meet the criteria that we had. It was too prescriptive. It took too long to manage compliance. And so last year when we reached out to stakeholders to get their feedback, the overwhelming response was, please take the burden off us to meet the criteria. We want to meet the criteria. We want to do the right thing, but you're actually making it really hard to meet them. And so using that information we went, rather than looking at prescriptive interactions, the Digital Service Standard version 2 now looks at that whole of investment approach, that whole of project approach. So starting from what are you actually trying to achieve? What is your service doing, and who is it impacting? Who are the users of your service? Right through to privacy implications, to managing data, to continuous improvement and monitoring. So that's we really simplified it, I guess, and made it much easier for agencies to apply for their individual circumstances, rather than being prescriptive and saying all agencies have to implement the criteria, and kind of forcing them to change their services and their approach to fit the service standard. The service standard is built out in a way that fits them. We want everyone to do well. We want them to build better user services, and this is the support to do that.
And Martin, did you have anything to add on the challenges?
Just kind of a small point on where a lot of the service standard and design principles came from in the UK was the principles emerged as a set of best practices kind of in the early days of GDS, as we were going through the early transformation, the creation of Gov.uk, the work on the exemplars, and we were kind of keeping a note as we went of things that seemed to be common patterns or common things that felt like they were important, and so they kind of emerged organically based on our own experience. And so I think making space for definitely using existing examples and best practices, but also I think there's benefit to making space for what you learn and grow to understand about what good looks like in a Thai context would be really valuable.
And then while you've got the microphone, so you touched on in your presentation, so the second question was around digital exclusion, and you said that you would you would be happy to maybe expand on what that looks like, and then maybe the way that GDS has approached it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can, maybe I'll talk for a minute and then we might pull up a couple of slides that I zoomed through. So I think the point about taking the time, as Ronwen spoke to really understand your users and their needs is a great foundation for addressing all different types of exclusion and access needs. Sometimes people's needs will be around, like they'll be financial, or they might be about language and understanding content. It might also be about struggling with complexity, for example, which is why the work we've done to make content on gov.uk easier to understand, why we've redesigned services to make them simpler, is really valuable. So in some cases you find that people are no longer excluded because the digital service is easier to use and understand than what you had before. Having said that, offering a face-to-face service is probably a good generic approach. So I think we saw that example of Italy in some of the best practices that were shared yesterday, particularly for older users who really value that channel. Having said that, let's go and look at, where are we? Up or down, there's a slide with lots of, the other way, yeah. Yeah, here we go. So this, we did a bit of research in GDS. I zoomed over this because I didn't want to talk any longer than I already have. We did a bit of research in GDS about different types of challenges or barriers that people can face when they are trying to access services. And I think this won't always, like not all of these will always apply, but I think these can be really useful because they give a little bit of a starting point for thinking about the barriers that people face. So for example, it could be awareness. You know, for example, knowing that there's a phone line to call or knowing that a service exists in the first place is something that people might not know. Another barrier is physical access. So for example, do you have access to an office or a printer to print out that form? Do you have access to a computer or a photo booth? Those can be other ways that people get excluded. People might not have access to time. For example, time to read information, to fill out forms, to travel to an office or something, to spend time on the phone or to wait for a response. Financial resilience is another barrier. So for example, people might not be able to risk paying the fine because actually they just can't afford it. They might not be able to pay a fee or pay a bus fare. They might not be able to get online or use a printer or take time off work to go to that appointment. People might have a challenge providing evidence that might be needed by a government service. So for example, to provide proof of address, bank statements, photo ID or character witness statements. Another barrier is people's interface and interaction skills. So for example, their ability to, yes, use a computer confidently, but also their ability to talk face-to-face or to speak or write clearly. Self-confidence can be another barrier as well. For example, people's belief in their ability to understand a process, complete complex tasks, or deal with uncertainty. Now certainly government tasks are often complex and they're often tasks that make us feel quite vulnerable because you can feel a bit powerless when you're interacting with government. So that can be an extra hard barrier for people to overcome. Also enthusiasm and motivation can be a real barrier for people. Asking for help, going through a long process, that can be another thing that excludes people. And trust as well. People might not have trust in particular organisations, in government, in technology. They might think that it might not be secure, sensitive, reliable or effective. And again, emotional resilience can be another barrier. So there are loads of barriers that people can experience. And we find that the way to think about this is to not think of people using the services as being a problem. We need to think that, you know, poor design that excludes people is the problem. And we need to be aware that exclusion can happen to people in loads of different contexts and in whatever channel we're using. So I think it's important to say that, you know, I talked a little bit about how face-to-face channels can help avoid digital exclusion. I think it's really important not just to say, oh, okay, we have a face-to-face offering, everything's fine. As we've seen, there are so many different barriers to accessing services that you need to do more work than that to dig into people's real needs. This is just the starting point list of common barriers, but for each service, the experience will be a bit different.
Any other questions from the room? Thanks. There's a mic coming to you now.
ขอหนึ่งคำถามนะคะคือจากการที่มีการพัฒนา Gov.uk หรือเป็นของประเทศออสเตรเลียมาเดี๋ยวนะเป็นการรวมเว็บไซต์จากหลายๆหน่วยงานราชการไปอยู่รวมกันนะคะขอถามคำถามในแง่ของคนพัฒนาระบบเพราะว่าในเรื่องของการรักษาความปลอดภัยของระบบแล้วก็ข้อมูลเพราะทุกอย่างจะไปอยู่รวมกันที่ทางประเทศของคุณทั้งสองประเทศเนี่ยพัฒนามาแล้วเนี่ยนะคะในแง่ของทั้งทาง infrastructure ทั้งหมดแล้วก็ตัวระบบเหล่านี้เนี่ยมีการน่าจะต้องมีการเซตเรื่องของ cyber security ด้วยใช่หรือไม่แล้วก็น่าจะต้องเป็นเรื่องที่สำคัญเรื่องหนึ่งถึงแม้ว่าในประเทศไทยตอนนี้เนี่ยนะคะเรายังไม่ได้ทำถึงขนาดที่จะมารวมกันหลายแอปพลิเคชันแต่ว่าในฐานะพอดีฉันมาจากกรมที่ดินก็ต้องเป็นหน่วยงานภาครัฐหนึ่งถ้าเกิดจะต้องมีการให้พัฒนาเว็บไซต์รวมกันเนี่ยไม่มีปัญหาเราก็ยินดี follow ตามนโยบายรัฐบาลนะคะแต่เราก็ต้องมั่นใจเหมือนกันว่าถ้าเราออกไปรวมแล้วเนี่ยคนที่รับการรวมของเราเนี่ยหรือหน่วยงานเจ้าภาพเนี่ยจะรักษาความมั่นคงปลอดภัยของข้อมูลเหล่านั้นแล้วก็มันก็ไม่ควรมีช่องให้เจาะเปิดเข้ามาถึงระบบของเราได้ด้วยเหมือนกันนี่ก็เป็นความกังวลก็เลยถามคำถามที่ว่าตอนที่คุณพัฒนาในประเทศของคุณส่วนเนี่ยน่าจะต้องมีเรื่องของ cyber security เป็นเรื่องสำคัญเพราะตอนนี้พัฒนาแอปพลิเคชันใดๆก็ตามที่อยู่บนอินเทอร์เน็ตหรือ e-service เนี่ยก็ต้องดูเรื่อง cyber security ไปพร้อมๆกันขอถามคำถามนี้ค่ะ
Thank you. It's a really good question, and it's tremendously important. Tremendously important. So, when we developed Gov.uk, we are absolutely thinking about security. So, thinking about the 2000 services. Sorry. Oh, it's in my earlier presentation. I forget. Sorry, I'm being really difficult. So, thinking about the situation before we had Gov.uk, we had about 2,000 different government websites. And thinking about that from a security perspective, some of those websites were well managed, well run, secure, resilient, following high quality principles. But some of those websites were very much not operating at that high standard. So I think that's one thing to say as a starting point. The unification and the bringing together of websites into a single domain didn't start from a position of, we have 2,000 websites and they're amazing. It started from a position of, we've got 2,000 websites and they kind of suck in a lot of cases. So how did we think about making things secure and high quality when we moved to Gov.uk? So there's two sides to this. So there's the public-facing information website, gov.uk, and then there's the services that are built and run by departments. So the services built and run by departments operate to a technology code of practice and a set of security expectations that are mandated centrally and are checked through the assurance process. So the departmental services, they're built and run by departments, and they'll often use GDS products to do that, but those are things that are built and run by departments to those common standards. So that bakes in high quality security expectations because it means that we won't let them go live if they don't meet those standards. So we haven't taken away the departmental services, we have taken away the departmental information websites, essentially, and consolidated those. And how do we approach that in terms of security? we do a lot of standard things that you'd expect to make gov.uk secure. So we have like regular security testing. We follow the standard industry best practices in terms of cyber security. We use a content delivery network to kind of reduce the attack surface of gov.uk. That also means that we can identify patterns of malicious traffic coming to gov.uk. So our content delivery network will handle about 99% of requests to gov.uk, and that will do things like spot, okay, we've got a distributed denial of service attack coming from wherever, and the content delivery network provider will actually kind of manage that so that most of that traffic never even hits our servers. So the CDN is really important. The cybersecurity standards are really important. The regular penetration testing and IT health check really important. And then I guess in general the use of open source software is really valuable for us because you have continual improvement of our infrastructure, and also the use of high quality commercial providers for cloud hosting is really valuable. So a load of our stuff that 10, 15, 20 years ago we would have had to worry about as on-premise infrastructure. At the moment we abstract away and we make it Amazon's problem or Google's problem or whatever. So for example, our databases, we use a managed service for those because that's going to have high resilience, high security, etc., etc. So we're avoiding running elements of our infrastructure that we don't have a particular opinion on or a particular value add in offering ourselves. GDS is not here to be innovative designers of database solutions. We're not here to be innovative designers of content delivery networks. We just want to use the highest quality, super secure ones that exist. Does that answer your question? I'm happy to talk some more if that's useful.
Any other questions? Yeah, there's one up here. If we can get a microphone, please.
ขออนุญาตเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะเนื่องด้วยงานบริการภาครัฐค่ะของประเทศไทยเองเนี่ยมีงานบริการจำนวนมากนะคะแล้วก็แต่ละหน่วยงานก็จะมีวิธีการพัฒนาที่แตกต่างกันไปรายละเอียดแบบฟอร์มต่างๆก็แตกต่างกันทีนี้อยากให้แนะนำค่ะว่าถ้าเกิดว่าอยากให้แนะนำข้อเสนอแนวทางหรือวิธีการที่จะให้นำงานบริการต่างๆเนี่ยมาไว้บนแพลตฟอร์มกลางอย่างปัจจุบันเนี่ยก็จะมีบิสกับซิติเซนที่มีมติครม.ออกมาด้วยแล้วว่าให้นำงานบริการมาให้บริการบนบิสหรือซิติเซนนะคะจะมีแนวทางวิธีการใดที่ให้สามารถนำงานบริการตรงนี้ขึ้นมาให้บริการได้โดยที่ไม่ยุ่งยากหรือซับซ้อนมากนักแล้วก็อยู่ภายใต้กรอบระยะเวลาซึ่งตอนนี้กพร.ก็มีแผนงานที่ให้นำงานบริการมาไว้ทั้งหมดอะค่ะบนแพลตฟอร์มกลางภายในปี70ด้วยแล้วค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you. That's a good question. So I can answer from a policy and standard perspective, which is, as I've mentioned before, so when we were building out the policy and standards, the digital experience policy and the standards, the 4 standards underneath it, the overwhelming feedback we got from agencies is that we're all different and you need to treat us individually. And so that's why that's why Australia took the approach that the policy and standards are really inclusive of all agencies and can be applied to all agencies in their current form with the focus on the end user perspective. And so that means that at the moment, when we're encouraging agencies to use the MyGov platform, there are agencies who are using that simply as an access point. And so they're using that secure approach to use digital identity to get into the MyGov platform, where they effectively have a number of tiles in front of them that they then link on to or click on to then take them to the respective agency. And then that website, that agency website, under the policy and standards, should be focusing that their services are meeting user expectations and user needs. So from a policy and standards perspective, we're not encouraging agencies to all be alike at the moment. Obviously, in an ideal world, simplicity and seamlessly, that would be great. But I think to make that happen, there has to be some understanding that that's going to take time. Some of our agencies have been around for a very, very long time with really old systems in place that are going to take time to update, to be more inclusive and to be more accessible, and are going to need resources applied to those. So as long as they're moving towards that, and if they're, so for example, our tax office portal, the tax office tile in the MyGov app, it just takes them to the tax office website. It's not actually part of the MyGov app at the moment. It is just a mechanism to a safe way that people can log in to access that agency website. Not an answer from a more technical side.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I strongly agree with what Ronald shared. I think that, as you've seen in the UK example, consistent branding really helps. So even if you haven't brought everything together, even if everything isn't delivered by the same people, giving users a sense that they are still interacting with the same government across different points of the journey is really helpful. So in the UK, when you start on the Government UK website with the information that it has, it looks iconic, it's very trusted, it's very, very easy to use. And then when you move on to interacting with the departmental service, it's the same colours, the same font, the same logo, the same components. And so from a technical perspective, those are actually different bits of infrastructure delivered by different teams and different departments. From a user's perspective, they will probably never notice that they went from the centralised website that's run by GDS through to a departmental service. Because from their perspective, it all looks and feels the same. So that could be one thing to help with, although I realise that encouraging people to change their brand is a challenge as well, right? But that would be one thing that's a potential approach. I think having the shared quality standards is really important. I think that having a shared understanding of what a good digital experience looks like allows people, wherever they are, wherever a service is being delivered, to work towards the same goals and aspirations. And I think that means that even if technically things aren't integrated, even if the brands are still different, at least the underlying quality of experience is trying to achieve the same thing. So I think that would help too. Using common components can really help with this. So obviously I'm head of product for GDS's platform products, so I would say this, that I think that using common components that government has built across government services can be so valuable for helping boost consistency, often in a really quick way. So for example, the Government UK Notify service that I shared with you, the one that we use to send emails and letters and text messages, people can get started with that in one day, like actually in less than an hour. It's so easy and quick to start using. It's something that services can adopt and they can add to the experience, but also in a consistent way, really, really easily. So I would say, see what opportunities there are for people to use platform components to integrate into their service, so that even if you've got these new services coming in, they might have different user experiences. See what elements of those could be made more consistent. And one other thought, kind of speaking a bit to one of the other points that Bronwyn made, is users often don't have a strong understanding of what government is, how it fits together, what the different parts are. And for those of us who have been working in government in a while, sometimes we forget how complicated and confusing it is, because we've been doing our jobs for a number of years and we have a mental map of how everything fits together. users often don't. And so one piece of advice to you, or maybe a piece of encouragement, would be that even the act of bringing together links to different services in one space can actually be really valuable. And it's like giving people a map of government, if you do that well. So even if you haven't redesigned the places on that map, having that map can help people understand what is available to them, how it fits together, and so on. So I would say, even if you're not able to transform all of those different services perhaps in the way that you would want, I would say invest some time and energy in thinking about how do we make that early experience of people navigating government easier to understand. Because there will be loads of different ways that you can help people find what they need. And it's really hard. That's a really hard challenge, by the way, and that work is never finished. We struggle with it on gov.uk a lot because there's so many pages and it's hard to design easy routes for people to find what they need. But I would encourage you to invest some time in that, exploring different approaches perhaps, testing them with real users, either in kind of user testing face-to-face, or maybe by launching competing versions of a design, launching them to small numbers of users, seeing which one is better, and then going ahead with that. So that would be my encouragement, is that even if you only have power over that central portal and what gets linked to and how it gets linked to, I think actually in that there's a huge amount of power, because you're giving people there a map of government and an entry point to government, and you can design that experience really well to make it so much easier for people to know what's going on and get to the right place.
Thank you so much. Before we move to the final reflection before lunch, were there any other questions? We'll have Bronwyn and Martin back after lunch as well. We've just got one over here in the middle of the room. And what I might do is, if people want to join the Mentimeter, I'll move to the question as well. We're just looking for your reflection from these last two sessions, and you can complete it while we're having the discussion as well, so we don't move too late into lunch. Okay, so we've got the microphone over here. Perfect. Go for it.
ค่ะขออนุญาตนะคะเขาสอบถามว่า ตอนนี้เรามีตัวเซอร์วิสกลางของรัฐบาลเนี่ยค่ะเราก็จะมันยังมีหน่วยงานคือการทำเซอร์วิสพวกนี้มันจะทำให้เกิด Data นะคะรวมตรงนี้มันมีหน่วยงานที่ดึงเอา Data ทุกอย่างเนี่ยไปใช้ในการวิเคราะห์หรืออะไรเพื่อรัฐบาลเนี่ยได้วางแผนหรืออะไรในการภาพรวมของประเทศนะคะหรือหน่วยงานที่เป็นแต่ละหน่วยงานเนี่ยสามารถดึงข้อมูลนะคะที่เกี่ยวข้องกับภารกิจของตัวเองเนี่ยเพื่อเอาไปใช้ประโยชน์ในการวางแผนกำหนดนโยบายหรือไปพัฒนาปรับปรุงภารกิจของหน่วยงานต่างๆเนี่ยยังไงนะคะก็คือการนำ Data จากที่เกิดจากการให้บริการนะคะไปใช้ในการวางแผนหรือสนับสนุนการตัดสินใจนะคะแล้วหรือว่าได้มีช่องทางยังไงบ้างคะที่สามารถเข้าไปดูพวกข้อมูลที่เป็นประโยชน์พวกนี้ได้ค่ะ
So in terms of the digital experience policy, so with the DTA, we've got the investment oversight framework. And so that's an established framework that is already in place that manages or that helps agencies build robust proposals and then manage their projects and investments as it moves into BAU. So through those, as I mentioned yesterday, it's a six-stage framework, and it already has data collection mechanisms in place. So I appreciate that in a way Australia's quite lucky, the DTA is quite lucky because we've already got this in place. And so we will capture, it becomes effective on the 1st of January, and we're going to start capturing data on agencies' compliance with the digital experience policy and standards through this existing framework. So we'll be asking agencies initially things like, have you heard of the digital experience policy? And building awareness and building understanding of what it means to comply, and then using that as a baseline moving forward. And it's going to take a long time. I'd love to think that we're going to get lots of data in the first 6 months. I think it's going to take a couple of years to get really good quality data. And then what we'll use that to, it's not about policing agencies, it's not about saying that agencies are in trouble if you're not meeting the policy and the standards. It's about encouraging agencies and using that data to make really good investment decisions by the government, to fund agencies who might need more support to meet the policy and standards, or to look at agencies who are actually doing a really good job in implementing and meeting the standards and using them as exemplars of best practice for other agencies, building the networks between agencies so that when you come to events like this, you actually already have those networks established and you know how each agency is working and which ones are working to best practice. So it is about having a uniform data collection process where for the DTA, we can gather that information in a central source and we can use that to provide that data-driven, evidence-based investment advice to government.
I'll try and be quick to avoid keeping people from lunch too long. So I'm happy to talk in more detail maybe later today. So a few quick points on the UK experience with data and data collection and sharing. We used to have what was called the performance platform, where all of the services had to report on the performance of their service. It was something that worked quite well, but it was, in English we would say, all stick, no carrots. So we were forcing people to do stuff, but there was kind of no benefit to them for doing it. So over time that became less successful. So that's something that we're expecting to redesign as part of the changes to digital governance in the UK that are going to get announced next month. So that's one thing to watch out for. Another challenge that we've had is around joining up analytics on user behaviour across the platform. So I talked previously about how we have Gov.uk, the information website, and then the individual departmental services that link off from that. We talked about how they're consistent as an experience, which is wonderful, but behind the scenes, they are different websites and different services. That's a problem for analytics and joining up our data, because we use Google Analytics on Gov.uk to understand where are people going, what problems are they having. It's great, it's really useful. Problem is, when someone goes from the central government website over to a departmental service, it is a different URL, it is a different domain, and so the analytics isn't joined up. So there's big projects going on at the moment to try and create what we're calling a single data environment, so that a user can go from the www.gov.uk information website over to a departmental service subdomain and still us be able to see what's going on for them. That is a big piece of work. Technically, it's been a real challenge, lots of stuff around cookies and subdomains, but also politically, right? Encouraging people to do that, to adopt that has been a challenge. I've got big dreams for using data in the future with our platform products. I wrote a blog post about a year ago, which talked way too much about all of this, but basically, I think there's a good opportunity, if we're able to get information flowing through our systems more effectively, for us to identify improvements to entire services in the future and potentially even use machine learning to help with that. But I can talk about that in more detail, maybe share a link separately, but I won't keep anyone any longer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's submitting their reflections on Mentimeter. It's really good to see those coming through. So we went a little bit over time with this session, so what we'll do is give just over an hour for lunch, and we'll come back and start the next session at 1:15. Perfect. And then, so feel free to head out for lunch now, and we'll see you back here at 1:15.
Thank you for the questions, it's really interesting, really good.
ขอบคุณนะครับเดี๋ยวช่วงบ่ายเราเริ่มพร้อมกันตอนบ่ายโมง15นะครับแล้วก็กรุณาเก็บของนิดนึงเพราะว่าช่วงบ่าย in the afternoon gonna be the station of a group discussion ไว้ก็เดี๋ยวเราจะกลับมาในรูปแบบของ group discussion ในช่วงบ่ายนะครับขอให้ทุกคนกลับมาในเวลาบ่ายโมง15นะครับห้องอาหารจะอยู่ชั้น2ในตัวตึกอาคารนะครับตัวตึกอาคารออกไปเดี๋ยวครับ
One, so what is governance? What is governance for you? And the question is not government. What is governance? What is about? We cannot go into a discussion about data governance or AI governance without actually being clear about what governance is. So, anyone, any ideas of what governance is about from your perspective? And there are no wrong answers. All different ideas are welcome. So again, the question is, what is governance? Come on, you just had lunch and coffee, so you should be energized. So either someone raise a hand, or I will just pick up someone. Please, go for it. Here's. You're going to speak in Thai or English? My little machine here.
So maybe it's like a principle of how a government should govern. I guess. Yeah, like it's like we know what a government have to do, but how is it supposed to do that? So it's kind of like a process, like a good process, good practice of how a government should be. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other answer about what governance is or is not? Someone maybe in the back table. You, madam. Do you have any idea about what governance is? And you can reply again in Thai or whatever language.
ขออนุญาตเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะถ้าจะมองในส่วนของตัว governance นะคะก็คือว่าหน่วยงานทุกหน่วยงานนะคะจะเริ่มด้วยการมี data เป็นฐานอยู่แล้วทีนี้พอเริ่มจากการเป็นฐานที่มี data ค่อนข้างเยอะแล้วในส่วนของ data ที่พูดถึงนะคะมันก็จะมีเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของข้อมูลส่วนบุคคลอยู่ด้วยซึ่งพอหน่วยงานทุกหน่วยงานที่อยู่ภายใต้การกำกับของgovernance นะคะแล้วมันมี data พวกนี้อยู่มันก็เลยทำให้เกิดเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของdata governance เกิดขึ้นเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของการ control data การใช้ data การเข้าถึง data ทั้งหมดการเป็นศูนย์รวมเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของการบริหารการจัดการ data ของหน่วยงานภาครัฐทั้งหมดอะค่ะ
Thank you very much. Very useful. Anybody else has any idea what governance is? Please go ahead. Do we have more like microphones?
Governance, I think, is a way, like, it's a framework of process, structure, like organization or management that can lead to some kind of action plans and like strategic actions.
Thank you very much. I mean, all the answer are actually right. I mean, governance is about precisely having in place the right mechanisms, the right against arrangements, the right institutional frameworks, the right controls, and so on, so that the government, or any organization actually, not only the government, any organization, including within the public sector, can deliver their mission. Okay, so for that they need specific tools that can help them precisely to deliver on their value. And once we have cleared the concept of governance, then is when we start to get more into a discussion about what data governance and AI governance is. So the purpose of this session is again to focus mainly on data governance, but nevertheless, before going into that, I would like to take a deeper dive into what AI governance would be. So since a couple of years ago at the OECD, we have been working precisely on the concept of data governance, but right now when more physically, given all the latest developments, we have been working on AI, the application of artificial intelligence in the public sector. So with that in mind, what we have been developing recently is a specific framework. Just let me try to make this work because I don't know how to open it. Should I be closer to there for it to work, or because I can? I mean, I can go with other slides, but.
I think just click on the slides.
Here's it. I think I'm moving it right now, so I have to be closer. I think, right? There you are. So you can see the slides on the screen. So we have been working since a couple of years on the concept of AI governance, data governance, and of course digital governance in the public sector. And all of them interfere or have synergies in common. For instance, from the perspective of digital government and digital governance, we do know that, for instance, there is an importance to have a clear, specific organization in charge of designing, implementing, and coordinating the digital government policy. We know the importance, for instance, of having legal and regulatory arrangements in place so that we can advance, or the governments can advance the different efforts and initiatives that they are putting in place. Then we go into the discussion, of course, about AI governance, which normally in the context of AI has taken more a focus on regulating the application of artificial intelligence. In some cases, there has been a strong focus on regulating the application or the implementation of artificial intelligence by the private sector. But nevertheless, as I was mentioning before, governments are increasingly trying to adopt and to apply artificial intelligence in the context of their work. And it has different purposes. I mean, the purpose of applying artificial intelligence in the public sector, for instance, can be to reduce the burden on repetitive tasks that public officials need to perform on a daily basis, so that artificial intelligence or data-intensive systems can help them precisely to reduce the burden and help them focusing on what matters, which is actually delivering value to the society, delivering good services to the people, designing and informing better policies as well. So the implications are quite vast. But in there, at the same time, we get more into the dive of data governance. I think it's needless to say to you why data is important in the context of AI. I think at this point, 2024, almost 2025, I think everyone knows the relevance of data governance in the context of AI systems. But again, you know, there is still a lot of need to invest further efforts to make sure that the data that should inform these systems or any other type of decisions within the public sector is fit for their purpose that it's supposed to deliver. And then this point is precisely when you go straight a little bit more into the concept of data governance in the public sector. So there are too many different definitions of data governance. In some cases, for instance, a couple of years ago, we were working with our colleagues working on the digital economy, on the development of a recommendation on data access and sharing, not only applicable to the public sector, but also applicable, you know, to data efforts across different sectors, to the digital economy, and so on. And we were discussing with our colleagues, as we're trying to do in this discussion, it was important to be clear about what we meant by data governance. And interestingly, given the fact that our colleagues were working on the application of AI and data in the public sector, one of their, or at least their approach back at the time was only on privacy. Okay, so for our colleagues, data governance was only about the protection of personal data. On our side, nevertheless, that was not the case. On our case, on our side, data governance or the protection of personal data and privacy is one of the goals of data governance. Okay, that is something that comes later. But from the point of view that we have within the context of the work that we do on digital government, data governance is about, as we were discussing at the very beginning, having the right arrangements in place, the right environment in place, so that the data could deliver value with trust. If you ask me, that's the definition that I like the most. Data governance is about making sure that data delivers value with trust. Okay? Trust in relation, as the lady was speaking about, to the protection of personal data, trust in relation to privacy, but trust in the data as well. How are you supposed to input data into data-intensive systems such as machine learning or artificial intelligence and so on, when you are not even certain that the data that you're going to fit or to input into these systems is actually good enough? How are you going to make sure that the output that these systems are delivering is fit for the purpose or is actually going to create a benefit for the specific social group that a specific policy is supposed to deliver value when the data is, for instance, not representative of these population groups? Okay, so this is where data governance comes really into the discussion. What you see in your screen is about, is a definition of DAMA, which is a well-known organization worldwide working on data management for 20 years. That is one of the definitions of data governance. Another definition of data governance, which is the one that I was just speaking about, is the one that you see in your screen. It took us 3 years, maybe, to come out with an agreement with our colleagues about what data governance was or was not. Okay, and this is why I started the presentation precisely on being clear about the concepts, so that everyone knows what we're going to be discussing today in the context of this specific session. But then, in the context of the work that we do on digital government, we also realized a couple of years ago that it was important to sit down with our delegates, to sit down with countries from the 38 different nationalities which are part of the OECD, and also with delegates from other countries, to have the concepts clear. So as we did just now, back at the time, it was like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we sit together with our delegates and start to ask the same question. So what is it data governance for you? What does it mean for you? And we kind of just have right now too many different concepts, like too many different type of responses. Some of them were speaking, I think that data governance is about standards, it's about interoperability, is about, in some other cases, data interoperability buses and data access and sharing mechanisms in the public sector. Those were the more technical aspects of data governance. Some others were like, no, actually we believe that data governance is about making sure that there is coordination among different bodies within the public sector, especially when these bodies are accessing and sharing data among each other. As some of you have mentioned, that is one of the big challenges that maybe is happening here in Thailand. Some others were speaking more about leadership. They were saying actually data governance in the public sector is about having a clear vision for data governance. It's having in place a data strategy that actually sets the path to what the government and therefore public sector organizations should be doing to make sure that data contributes to the delivery of policy goals and value, as I was mentioning before, for the society as a whole. And after having all those discussions and several different meetings with with our delegates, well, we came out with this framework. And this framework, which is what we call the model for data governance in the public sector, is the framework, the model that we have been applying when we go to countries, including Thailand, to actually try to support how they design and implement their policies in the sense that trying to make sure that actually they have all these different arrangements in place to pursue or to support data access and sharing. So let me go through the model. I will go, I don't know where should I, maybe I will go closer to the screen in there. So what we did, sorry, a little bit more of background for this. This is actually not that much different from the discussion that was happening years ago around information governance. I mean, if you see the different components that are in place in the context of this specific framework, it's not that much different. It's actually the same. But again, when we developed this model years ago, there was no clarity. Everyone was speaking about access and sharing data, everyone was speaking about the interoperability and so on, but there was not a clear understanding among our delegates in terms of the relevance of having clarity in terms of what data governance means in the public sector. So, as we did was just to create a model which integrates different layers. Okay, so we have 3 different layers in place. The first one, which you see at the top right corner of your screen, is what we call the strategic layer. And it's precisely about having in place the right leadership and the right vision so that you can deliver value from the data. As I was mentioning before, the strategic layer is about, for instance, leadership. It's about having in place a national strategy and so on. And these are examples. Because again, something that is important to mention is that context matters. Okay? How specific countries translate, for instance, data leadership can vary. Because you have some countries where maybe the data leadership could be or could take the form of one person. Okay? And this is why in the model you see a reference to chief data officers. There is example of Estonia with the chief data officer position, which is one person within one ministry in charge of coordinating and developing the data strategy for the public sector. Okay, and that responds to the context and the needs of Estonia. Okay, but for instance, also as part of the Nordic and Baltic countries, in 2017 we went to work with Sweden in the context of the digital government review, and we were discussing with them, hey, do you think that actually a chief data officer, a one single person leadership role would help or would support in advancing data access and sharing in the public sector or with other sectors? And they say, no, because actually in Sweden, what we have is a consensus-based culture. Okay? They give a lot of priority to discussing and try to find consensus among different organizations in the public sector. So Sweden, what they did was to create a data task force, okay, where they sit together maybe 5 or 6 policy sector organizations, those organizations leading or being more advanced in terms of data efforts, so that they can come out with an agreement in terms of how the data strategy for Sweden would look like. What I'm trying to say here is that this is, and what you see on your screen is the ideal model for data governance, but please, again, remember that how that is translated or performed is dependent on the context and, let me say, the culture of the public sector and the national culture in the country. Then you have another layer which is related to the tactics. Okay, what are the different instruments that can help the government or the leadership to precisely steer the vision for data governance or to coordinate the vision for data governance in the public sector? And for that purpose, you have different mechanisms that have been in place. You have data committees. You have, for instance, the importance of having what we call data stewards in the public sector. Does anybody know what the data steward position would be? Any idea? I'm speaking about leadership roles in the across public sector organizations right now, but it is steward. Well, when we were discussing about that with countries, they were also asking the same. They have no idea. Okay? For us, a data steward is the one that is able to connect the technical aspects of data within a specific organization with the strategic vision for data that the government has. For us, that is a data steward. To think about it as the version at the institutional level of the leadership, of the data leadership. Okay? And these are the persons who at the same time understand the needs of the sector, understand the need of the organizations, but at the same time are able to understand the technical aspects of data and to connect that to broader policy goals defined by the government in the country. 2 years ago, we went to Slovenia because one of the big challenges that Slovenia was facing back at the time is that they were doing great things, you know, at the technical level in relation to data across different public sector organizations, but there was no coordination, there was no a clear community of data practitioners in the public sector. So what we did together with them was to define or to determine a role description, a job description for what data steward should be that respond again to the needs of the Slovenian government. What they did was to take that job description of the data steward, they connected that to the different strategies that they have in place, and they created a group of practitioners of leading data stewards in the public sector who are able now, you know, to keep advancing the goals of the Slovenian government. And in there you have other aspects, of course, you have skills and so on. You also have funding, which is really important. We were just having a discussion during lunch precisely about that, how much funding is important as a policy lever that the government can use to actually enforce data standards. Because as part of that specific layer, as you see in your screen, you also have regulation. But sometimes, you know, regulations can be really beautiful. You know, you can have great regulations in place, you can have great legislation in place, but then what is the problem? Implementation. Then nothing happens. You can also have at a technical level, for instance, data standards, but you know something, public sector officials maybe have no idea how to implement them, or maybe at some point they just don't care, okay? And they don't have the right tools in hand. So sometimes there is a need for the government to use, as I will explain later in the presentation, the budgeting process of the government to actually define clear thresholds that can help to enforce precisely the application of the policy goals and different standards in the public sector. And then after that, we have what we call the technical effort, the delivery effort, okay? And this is where I was mentioning before, you know, different elements come into place, including the definition of data standards for the public sector, data catalogs for the public sector, okay? How are you supposed to know what you can do with the data when actually sometimes public sector organizations do not have a clear idea about the data that they hold. And data catalogs can help for that. Data classification mechanisms, as I was also mentioning before, the technical tools such as data interoperability buses that can help precisely to access and share data within the public sector. But again, you know, the big challenge is precisely to make sure that the governments use or the public officials use this for their different purposes. Any questions about this? Come on, any questions? Yes, please go. Give you the.
How would you compare data steward with like Scrum Master in HI methodology? How would you compare it?
That is not only a technical position. That was a big challenge that we had. For us, data steward again is more tactical, and it's able precisely to connect those technical skills and technical knowledge about data with the delivery of strategic objectives. for us, that is one of the positions that in some cases is missing in the public sector. Is there any other question? No? Great. So let's keep advancing. My colleague Senju and my colleague Julian yesterday, they presented the Digital Government Policy Framework. You might remember it, which included 6 different dimensions. Does anybody remember the dimensions? Because at the end of the day, some of you put the importance of applying the Digital Government Policy Framework. So let's try to recap or to remember a little bit what was discussed yesterday. Does anybody remember the dimensions, or at least 1 or 2, of the Digital Government Policy Framework? So maybe Sanyu, can you remind us the Digital Government Policy Framework dimensions? Yes. Oh, come on, yeah.
Digital by design, data-driven, government as a platform, open by default, user-driven, and proactiveness.
Yes.
You have just earned that. So we encourage you to respond, because there is only one way. So, thank you very much, that you are right. But what is important about the different dimensions of the Digital Government Policy Framework is that, as also my colleagues spoke about yesterday, we have been using that framework not only to apply it into different digital government studies at the national level, but also to develop the Digital Government Index, which also was presented yesterday. The Digital Government Index of the OECD is structured precisely on its base around those 6 different dimensions. And what you see just next to your screen are the results for OECD countries in relation to the dimension on data-driven, okay, which precisely was assessing the different aspects that I was just speaking about before in the context of data governance in the public sector. These are the results for OECD countries. It's not the purpose to explain why some countries run in the way that they do. But what I can tell you is that the data-driven dimension is the element of the framework in which the countries rank the second better. Which is important, shows actually the importance that countries are given to advancing data access and sharing within the public sector. Now, important to remember, there is this other dimension, as your colleague just mentioned, which is called open by default, in which we also integrate open data efforts into the measurement. Okay, I am not going to be speaking about our data index for the OECD, but just as background, the World Data Index is one of the benchmarks that we have to measure the design and the implementation of open data policies across OECD member countries, and we are also working right now in a version for Southeast Asia for the Digital Government Index and the World Data Index, and that will include Thailand. So that is just important for your context. Keeping into mind that I would like to present you a couple of examples from different countries or how countries are implementing, the different layers that we just spoke about in the context of the data governance framework. At the strategic level, you have the example, for instance, of the Netherlands, who created the national data agenda as a means precisely to send a clear vision for the efforts that they are implemented in the context of data. You have also the example of Ireland, which also created a devoted data strategy. But what is important to mention is that these countries are still some examples in terms of how OECD members are implementing these strategies in the public sector, but in some cases, countries decide not to have standalone instruments like this, okay? So in some cases, for instance, it can happen that one country decides to have the data strategy as part of the digital government strategy. That can also happen. In other instances, countries have also decided to create data strategies in the context, or to link them in the context of artificial intelligence strategies. Okay, so it is not necessarily that the data strategy is a standalone instrument. In some cases, it is part or embedded as part of broader digital government strategies or any other type of strategies for the public sector. What is the situation in Thailand? Do you have a data strategy, or is it included as part of the overall digital government strategy in the country? You should know this. You're working on digital government. So, no idea. I'm asking you, I don't know either. Or maybe I know, and maybe I do what I want to say. No? No idea? Anyone? Well, maybe you have some homework to do, because I think we need to start first by knowing the own policies that we're trying to implement in the context of the different initiatives or projects that you're working on. Then, as I was also mentioning before, there is also the efforts that different countries are putting in place to create leadership positions in the public sector. In New Zealand, for instance, they created the government chief data steward position for the government. Is written in the name, and they placed this position, or more the mission, as part of the responsibilities of the chief of executive of statistics. In France, they also created this leadership role, but they put it as part of the institution in charge of digital government in the country. And this has been fundamental for this country to try to advance in their endeavor to in relation to the implementation of their different data strategies for the public sector. In the case of France, it is important to mention that the data leadership role is also in charge of implementing the open data policy. Okay, so France, if you take a look, I don't have the slide here in my presentation, but if you take a look at how they are doing in terms of open data, they are ranking very high. And it's precisely because they have managed to create this governance around data and open data for the public sector. Any questions at this point? Questions? Or has anybody found if Thailand has a data strategy? No? Just so that you're curious? Great. So the US also created this strategy for the public sector, but the case of the US is really interesting because of the following. In its relation to leadership and to coordination. I was speaking before about funding. Do you remember why the funding discussion was important, the budget cycle, the thresholds? I was just mentioning that at the very beginning. Why is it important? I mean, yesterday you were speaking about terms of reference, huh? As tools to get money. So why is it important in this context? I just spoke about 10 minutes ago. Anybody? You? Why is it important? You can speak in Thai.
ไม่ได้เงินก็ทำระบบไม่ได้
Okay, and therefore, why it would be important in the context of what we're discussing right now? Will I pass it? Pressure. We don't have any other questions. Thank you very much. Any other answer?
เสริมจากน้องมาค่ะก็คือในส่วนของงบประมาณมีความสำคัญเพราะว่าเวลาเราพัฒนาเรื่องของดิจิทัลหรืออะไรพวกนี้ค่ะมันก็ต้องดูเรื่องของโครงสร้างพื้นฐานนะคะอุปกรณ์ฮาร์ดแวร์ซอฟต์แวร์ทุกอย่างเนี่ยมันต้องใช้งบประมาณในการลงทุนนะคะไม่งั้นก็ไม่สามารถที่จะขับเคลื่อนตรงนี้ได้
How the government can use that process in the context of what we're discussing right now. Because you're speaking about right now, which is right, of course the correct answer, not the correct answer, it's a great answer. But in the context of what we're discussing right now, how the government can use to their advantage. Because right now you spoke about the needs that you have for the budget, as the gentleman where I go here. But how in this overall discussion, you know, the budget can be used as a tool by the government.
เป็นเครื่องมือเพื่อขับเคลื่อนตรงนี้ใช่ไหมคะคือโอเคก็คืออาจจะกำหนดนะคะเหมือนเป็นตัวชี้วัดว่าถ้าเกิดหน่วยงานไหนที่สามารถพัฒนาให้เป็นหน่วยงานที่มีการบริการแบบภาครัฐดิจิทัลได้เนี่ยก็จะได้รับจัดสรรงบประมาณเพิ่มขึ้นหรืออะไรอย่างนี้ค่ะก็จะทำให้เหมือนเป็นมาตรการจูงใจให้ทุกคนพัฒนาบริการของหน่วยงานหรือเปล่าถูกหรือเปล่าไม่รู้ตรงคำถามหรือเปล่า